In an ever-connected world where companies are keeping tabs on what we're watching, playing, liking, etc., it forms a clearer picture than ever of what works. At least in theory. This has led to scores of movie studios deploying bankable formulas for the next Hollywood blockbuster, and gaming too has started to give way to generic by-the-numbers toss across the 2010s. It's why something like Death Stranding is such a massive breath of fresh air, but the point still stands. Where does the line fall when it comes to analysing the wants and needs of the masses, and how do you implement that whilst maintaining genuine creativity? Risk becomes a calculable factor, and that's before you factor in marketing gaffes, major delays, broken game engines, or just plain bad releases that misjudge everything. All it takes is one major stumble to fall flat on your face, and when the whole world is watching, you might just never recover. I'm Scott from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 exact moments that killed video game franchises. Number 10. Dance Combat? Def Jam Icon. I will forever stand by the first two Def Jam games as some of the best brawler meets fighting titles ever released. The first, Vendetta, was more a straight-up wrestling game, albeit with ludicrously over-the-top slams, spins, and finishing moves that were a blast to chain together and experiment with. Fight for New York built on this perfectly, speeding things up, refining the presentation, and taking battles to the streets, with some brutal environmental interactions. It is literally the most fun, and every day it isn't available on the Switch is a cardinal sin. However, after both of these titles, developers Aki Corporation moved off the project, and one of EA's various teams, called EA Chicago at the time, stepped in. Sadly, they killed the momentum this series had right there and then. Showing off some promising trailers and screenshots, Icon's big innovation was making the environment a weapon. How? By trying to attack and keep a rhythm alongside your attacks. It meant that levels pulsated along with your punches and kicks, but actual control and feedback was horribly sluggish. All it took was one terribly received demo to result in god-awful sales and 6 out of 10 scores across the board, as the franchise was immediately done. Number 9. The Boulder Punch. Resident Evil 5. I didn't say anything about games coming back from death, because man is it obvious that Resident Evil went down a dark path before saving itself before it was too late. Resident Evil 7 is ostensibly a full reboot, redesigning key characters and swapping the perspective to first person, but that period after RE4 started to veer into full-on anime territory was a sight to behold. As if trying to match the stupidity of the Resident Evil films, come the scene where Chris Redfield has his path blocked by a giant boulder when chasing Wesker through a volcano, don't ask, his solution is to shoulder barge and punch it out of the way. Playable as a quick-time event where you're just mashing buttons along with uppercuts and hooks, the sequence went on to exemplify everything people were already sick of with this new direction. To say nothing of how full-on dumb RE6 would then feel afterwards. Number 8. Master Chief and Spartan Locke become friends. Halo 5. Some people would say that Halo died when Bungie left the IP, or when Halo 4 essentially retconned Chief's fake-out death by confirming that he floated on through space to another planet, something that was hinted at the end of Halo 3's credits anyway. However, I posit to you that Halo 4 was a damn solid shooter, and 343 are capable devs. Just look at their work remastering the first game in the series. No, the thing that killed Halo stone dead was a marketing campaign built on lies. Centered on Master Chief doing something that had drawn the ire of the UNSC government, he was then to be hunted by Locke, an elite Spartan soldier who also looked to have some personal stake in bringing John back in. Only this wasn't even remotely the case. The reality of Halo 5 was Master Chief disobeying an order and choosing to track Cortana alone, to which Locke does tussle with him once when trying to stop him, and the pair are then friends for the rest of the game. There was nothing even close to the various charged up trailers that made it out like this was going to be the thrust of the whole game. The second we resolved this one scene everybody was looking forward to, any remaining goodwill for the franchise was kinda squandered for good. Number 7. Going Xbox exclusive. Rise of the Tomb Raider. Lara Croft and Tomb Raider just aren't what they used to be. Obviously, yes, Lara herself is a far more athletic, battle-worn warrior than someone designed to be hung on teenagers' walls or in the pages of Playboy, but the games too don't seem to have anywhere near the same pull as back in the 90s and 2000s. Why? Well, I'm gonna hang it on Rise of the Tomb Raider going Xbox One exclusive, right when the console itself was the single most hated thing across the industry. Fans and newcomers alike simply ignored the follow-up to 2013's fantastic reboot of the character, and the perception of Lara being a character you could ignore never really went away. Of course, it didn't help that the games used the hook of seeing Lara become the Tomb Raider 3 times in a row, morphing her into a weirdly brutal, almost one-dimensional faux badass in Shadow of the Tomb Raider. If this was an attempt to bring back the teenage audience from yesteryear, they'd long since departed. Number 6. When we saw this face. Assassin's Creed Unity. Ubisoft really dropped themselves in it with the company-wide slogan of "The next generation starts here," because all it took was one look at the disastrous Assassin's Creed Unity at launch and everything fell apart. Darkly ironic in terms of how this generation has become known for broken titles on day one, a need for sizable patches, and games kind of feeling like early access, AC Unity's opening salvo of BS started even earlier when the game was being demoed before release. Yes, Ubisoft's art department knocked it out of the park in terms of a gorgeously rendered look at Revolution-era France, but gameplay looked to be the epitome of more of the same. Come launch, all it took to cement Unity's fears and worries was this hilariously disastrous face on Xbox and PC, which was only then removed thanks to a 40-gig patch that replaced massive chunks of the entire game. Ubisoft then going through that multi-year patch where it was nothing but disappointment and bad business decisions, it kinda all started with this. Number 5. Not being able to catch 'em all. Pokemon Sword and Shield. Now, we'll just see how the Pokemon franchise goes, but considering the backlash to Sword and Shield, it's not in a very good place. Because it might have took Nintendo over 20 years to do it, but in one fell swoop, they single-handedly destroyed any goodwill around Pokemon Sword and Shield practically overnight. Alongside things like the game looking and playing like another 3DS installment, rather than something overhauled for home consoles, the biggest issue directly contradicts the series' iconic tagline of catching them all. And going forward, that's an even bigger deal because the whole point of Pokemon is amassing a tiny army of lovable creatures. Because in Sword and Shield, you just can't. Yes, you can catch all of the new creatures and scores of others from some past generations, but not the full set. And when it comes to the ones that Nintendo chose to omit, they chose some of the most beloved in series history. Bulbasaur, Squirtle, Mewtwo, Clefairy, the list goes on. Nintendo have made it very clear that the decision is to push for new ideas and progression for the brand overall. The mandate was to pick and choose which creatures were worth carrying forward, which only makes it more baffling as to why so many lovable iconic designs were left behind. Now, I will totally clarify that Sword and Shield is still a solid and enjoyable Pokemon game, but for many fans, the communication of these changes and who we won't be seeing for another few years is just way too much of a negative. Number 4. Miss me? Batman Arkham Knight. Remember the end of Arkham City? The absolute stones on Rocksteady deciding to kill Joker in canon and have Batman walk his corpse out amongst various police officers as the credits rolled. It was seismic, legendary, bold, experimental, and everything that gave you hope for Rocksteady as a creative force. For the years that followed, they'd only reinforce what went down. Joker is definitely dead, they'd say, focusing the spotlight on the Arkham Knight, an entirely new character created for the game. Come launch, not only did the Arkham Knight calling Bruce Wayne old man heavily imply from the get-go that it was Jason Todd all along, but then Joker pops up half an hour later, forcing himself into the rest of the game. I say forcing because the reality of Joker's role in Arkham Knight is the polar opposite of being dead all along. He's practically another main character, popping up in Bruce's psyche at every turn, even injecting himself into ventilation shafts and the edge of buildings, so you're never without a random quip or cackle from Mark Hamill. Obviously, it goes without saying that Hamill's Joker is iconic and lovable, but we'd made peace with his passing. We all just wanted something new. For Rocksteady to undo so much goodwill and forward momentum to play it as safe as possible was notably jarring. And as the franchise has since disappeared for almost half a decade, it's a clear indication that they too were getting very tired of the Bat mythos overall. Number 3. That first trailer. Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. Another one for the died and came back pile, Call of Duty went through one hell of an experimental phase across the 2010s. Without anyone seeming to ask for it and feeling more like a preemptive response to Titanfall becoming the next big name in first-person shooters, once that franchise failed to catch on, COD was left chasing an artistic direction that nobody wanted, falling apart completely with 2016's Infinite Warfare. Coming after the badly received Black Ops 3, itself a game about mind-melding super soldiers and sequences that played themselves if you let go of the controller, Infinite Warfare's trailer instantly became the most downvoted video in YouTube history. Although I will personally stick up for Infinite Warfare being an almost Star Wars-esque romp through the cosmos with some very well-delivered stakes and a fun crew of characters, this just wasn't Call of Duty and it was plain to see. In terms of a vocal opposition to all of this, fans were screaming for a return to normality for the franchise the only way they knew how. And that dislike bar morphed into a forgettable return to World War II before Black Ops 4 went multiplayer only to avoid more storytelling qualms, and COD finally stood tall once again with a reboot of Modern Warfare. It's almost like the last 10 years never happened, and you kinda have to ask yourself just how much life is there left in revisiting the past and hand-waving away the direction that multiple studios seem to be going in. Number 2, Hideo Kojima leaves Konami. Metal Gear Solid. Rare is the studio that can continue a franchise known for a particular developer's signature elements, but impossible is the task of mimicking Hideo Kojima's mind. For almost 30 years, Kojima-san had driven the Metal Gear Solid series, making zero compromises to his wacky, ever-experimental, and largely improvised with each installment vision, the end result being a die-hard fandom, pop culture recognition, and endless love for each end product. Come the end of MGS5's release cycle, we started finding out about how he and Konami's top brass could no longer see eye to eye on the game's mechanics and scope, when Konami themselves were more interested in gambling software, pachinko machines, and sports equipment. It became an ugly back and forth for a good few months, comprising reports of workers being demoted to janitor duty while under constant surveillance, until Kojima and his team finally freed themselves of their contractual obligations, fleeing to the warm embrace of Sony PlayStation. Kojima Productions was kept as a name, Death Stranding was born, and he's never looked back. Metal Gear Solid though, that was turned into a zombie survival sim, but it didn't even sell enough units to chart in the UK. Rest well, sweet prince. Number 1, My Face is Tired, Mass Effect Andromeda. Begin autopsy. Time of death, March 16th, 2017. Cause of death? Public exposure to a painful amount of unfinished animations, resulting in a brutal onslaught of GIFs, captured footage, and highlight reels, killing the subject stone dead mere hours before its official release date. Yes, the full release would come and things would only get worse, as Mass Effect Andromeda's facial animations were a complete laughingstock. Characters grimace, looked like they were struggling not to give the poop deck a new meaning, and all-round failed to accurately convey any human emotion. It all culminated in one Foster Addison, a character who has to appear aggressive towards protagonist Ryder, literally outlining that her face was tired from dealing with all the stress of the situation in-game. Talk about a disastrous combination of terrible dialogue and a situation unfolding around a lack of polish. Mass Effect Andromeda's woes came from mismanagement and infighting between studios, but it also sold so bad and dragged EA through the mud that they put the franchise on ice for years to come. Thankfully, I do say years to come, as I record this, a new Mass Effect has been confirmed to be in development. Here's to that game, and here's to the whole IP being put back on track. And that's my breakdown of specific moments that totally killed their franchises stone dead. Let me know your favorites down in the comments below, and don't forget to check out the WhatCulture Gaming Podcast. For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com, and I'll catch you soon.